The mist had a way of reshaping everything, turning familiar streets into uncharted territory. Mailboxes looked like sculptures, sidewalks like rivers of grey glass, and even the smallest garden shrub became a mysterious silhouette. I passed a row of hedges, noticing tiny droplets clinging to each leaf, refracting the dim light into faint sparkles. Something about that fragile beauty, the way the world could create art without intention, made me pause.
Ethan is a small writer inspired by the works of Winifred Georg Siebold's book, The Rings of Saturn. This is how Ethan's book, A Cloudy Walk, began. He disliked English and writing class. However, he had a creative mind. When he bought The Rings of Saturn, it gave him an idea to go for a walk. The time was set in the future in the beginning. It said September 2026 when the audiobook was released on March 31st, 2026. But he did go on a walk before the book was created.
When you read this book about his cloudy walk, there is a load of differential genres, like a philosophical nature, narrative blending literary fiction and survival and existential reflection to a solitary walk that becomes a lifetime. I say this because the story does not rely on plot alone, but on the slow observation of the world where nature, decay, isolation shape a journey that transform movement into meaning.
At first, the narrator would feel a gentle recognition as small details return with a clarity memory alone never held. It would feel like seeing a life once lived, but never fully noticed in the moment. There would be a quiet fascination in that awareness, a questioning of whether they were always this attentive. As the story continues, that clarity would deepen into something more unsettling. The narrator would begin to see patterns they couldn't recognize before the slow drift, the unnoticed turning points. What once felt like a simple movement would now feel inevitable. The middle would be the most difficult to face, not because of dramatic events, but because of how quietly everything changed. Survival would reveal itself as routine, and routine as a kind of silent surrender. There would be an uneasy realization that no single moment marked being lost. It simply continued without interruption. This is where understood too late takes shape, not as regret, but as delayed clarity. The narrator would see they were always searching for meaning, but too immersed to recognize its full form. And yet, there would also be a quiet respect for the life that unfolded. Even in isolation, observation never stopped, giving the experience a strange dignity. By the end, the narrator wouldn't wish to change anything, because the journey would feel complete. The walk, the stillness, and the passage of time would merge into one continuous movement. The final realization would not feel dramatic, but calm and settled, like finally seeing the full shape of something that was always there. Along the shoreline, the descriptions of life are precise enough to become visual. The strands of chlorophyta are not just mentioned, but carefully observed, tangled, glistening, washed ashore in uneven layers. The writing slows down on their texture, making them feel almost physical, slippery, damp, heavy with salt and the memory of movement. Their color shifts subtly across the page, from bright green to fading muted tones where decay has already begun. The same attention is given to the crabs scattered along the docks and tide line. Carcinus myanas appear as small, weathered remnants of motion, their forms once quick and precise, now still and hollowed by time. Nearby, Cancer paguras are described with a heavier presence, larger, more structured, their symmetry still visible even in death, claws softened by water and erosion. What makes these descriptions effective is not just what is shown, but how closely they are observed. Every detail, the sheen of wet shell, the curl of seaweed, the smell of salt mixed with decay, builds a sensory image that the reader does not simply read, but reconstructs mentally. The reader is not told what to imagine. They are given enough precision to see it themselves, almost as if standing there, looking down at the tide line where life and decay exist side by side.
This is where the story begins, as I descend down these steps, holding the same notebook that I used on my walk in the book. Now, the more we get into this walk, the more fictional it starts to get. But for now, let's go on a cloudy walk. Now, in the book, I mentioned about turning a corner, and well, this is the corner in which I turn to officially start my walk. Now let's get to the city. The city is a big part of my book, but not as big as the beach. However, I do happen to mention a small bakery. Well, here's a small bakery. Through the fogged windows, like I mentioned, I saw shapes moving behind glass. A baker kneading dough, and also pastries glistening with moisture. Now, this bakery is a key part because it shows the sweetness of how life can be and how you should savor every moment like how you're saving a flavor. Now, let's go on to the main part of the beach. On the front cover of the book was the beach with the overcast sky. Well, here is the beach with an overcast sky on a very windy day. At the time that I took this book, the beach, the shore was infested with crabs and seaweed. Now it's a lot cleaner, like a clean memory. Now, let's go to the forest scene. This is what I mean by the more in-depth you go into the book, the more fictional it starts to get. The forest is actually not connected to the beach that I was just at showing you guys, but instead a few miles away from it. The forest represents the final resting place, returning your soul back to Mother Nature, since it is the final resting place of my book. This is where I will conclude my journey. Until next time.